Tube amplification is pretty interesting. I gotta say, tube amplification is interesting because that's where it all began. That's where everything started, and then solid state came along, and that really changed everything. And there's a difference between tube amplification and solid state amplification. A lot of that has to do with the way clipping takes place or distortion. Clean sounds about the same, however, there is a cutoff, and those with more discerning ears would definitely be able to tell the difference probably between a solid state amp and a tube amp when you're playing clean. But there is a cutoff that takes place with a solid state amp because of the way the chips are designed. And you got to think of it as a square wave, and then you got to think of it as a wave like on the ocean, which is kind of a rounded thing, a rounded type of curvature. And here's what happens is when you hit a guitar chord or speak into something that is being amplified, a square wave from your solid state would be a straight up and over and then a cutoff, much like a square box. And it cuts off and it misses a little something, and I call that warmth. The warmth that takes place with a tube, you're getting the same effect. It's going about everything the same way, but the problem is it's more subtle. And that subtleness is what you actually hear. That's what's pleasing to your ear. And not only that, from what I understand, there's a difference in the harmonics. Do I have a harmonic? Can I measure all this stuff? No, I can't. But you can hear. You can hear the difference of this. And there's harmonics. And there's some harmonics that are pleasing to the ears. There's other harmonics that are not. And tubes, depending on how they're biased, the preamp tubes, will create different harmonics, and that's really what we're looking for as far as getting sustain and colorful sound and so on and so forth out of an amplifier. Whereas with your solid state amps, that becomes a little more difficult because of the chips they're using. You're limited to the amount of chips that you can use, and not only that, most solid state amps are made on a circuit board, and it's harder to change those chips. And the bottom line is you're really limited. There's not so much modifying the chips. You really have to change manufacturers of the chips or the way the chips are designed inside in order to recreate things. Another thing with solid state amps, you'll notice that they've come out with the digital era, as we call it nowadays. And what that is they're sampling tube amps. That's basically what they're doing, is they're sampling the sound, trying to recreate what a tube amp does in a solid state form. And I must say, some of them do a great job at it. I'm not going to say that they don't. They're absolutely wonderful. And I got to say that if you're a cover band musician, I think it's a great choice because you've got a lot of options. You know something, you're playing so fast that people aren't even going to notice in the audience. But the bottom line is you can do a lot with those amps, and there's a lot more you can do with the real estate inside of an amp, which you'll see a little later when we show the insides of these amps. And you can have the channel switching and all these effects and everything else built into the amp in a small little platform. My problem with that is, do they sound great? Absolutely. I'm not going to say that they don't, but when they break, hey, you're stuck buying a whole board or a whole amp. That's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot of fixing them. Not that they can't be fixed. It's just the amount of time it takes to diagnose the problem and get to the bottom of the problem. It's probably going to cost less money to replace the board or the parts. And that's basically what it boils down to, whereas tube amps are a lot different than that. And again, it's got to do with what do you want to do with music. How warm do you want to sound? Do you want to sound bluesy? Do you want to sound jazzy? Countries? Everything's got a different, all these different genres, as they call it. There's a difference in the style of playing, that's including your hands, so on and so forth, but there's a difference in the guitars, the amplifiers that are used, and making this sound. And if you're looking for warmth, whereas a lot of musicians are looking for warmth, then I gotta truly say the tubes is the only way to go. Solid state amps are far less money, and not only that, they weigh a lot less. I can tell you right now, the transformers, everything weighs a lot less. And which brings us into actually combos and heads in cabinets, which is kind of an interesting take on things also. They can come in both forms. They can come in combos, which would be your amplifier with a speaker all in one box, which is very easy to carry from gig to gig. And then also they build them in a head form, also with a cabinet, which means you can change the cabinets or the speakers that are within the cabinets without changing the amp, which is a great idea instead of having to take it apart and pull the speaker out of your solid state amp and try another speaker, which really to me seems like a hassle. The beauty with solid state amps is they are pretty dependable. They're great for gig to gig, and I don't know that you could probably handle them a little bit rougher than you could handle a tube amp, I gotta say. There's no glass parts in there per se. So actually for a beginner with just starting out, you know, a solid state amp may be the way to go if you're not into so much of the warmth, but you want to start playing, you want to amplify it, and especially if you want to get into high gain or some of that distortion type stuff. They don't create the same distortion as tubes, but however, with today's pedals, that solid state amplifier is a perfect clean platform to start with using pedals in order to create that distortion and that overdrive. So I think that's a perfect place to start for a young kid, and start with a combo. What the heck if it's a solid state? Start with a combo. The beauty with that is tubes in a combo don't play well. Why? Because the speaker makes vibrations. It pushes air. That's what speakers do. Solid state amp, guess what? You don't have to worry about those parts getting vibrated so much like you do the tubes. So that can come into play also, just to keep in mind.